I'm finding some of the bleaker stuff actually quite funny, like the fact that my 2 review pile is just like a total film list of the most depressing movies ever made, and I'm just like, it's just quite funny though. Like, oh, my kickback time off, time to really stretch out and relax with another fucking Lucas Moodysson movie about sex trafficking.
It's so typical though, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's bleak.
Oh man. Well, not something that you can say for the film that we're about to cover today.
No, that is true. This is a fun romp, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
Cheesy fun romp. Yeah.
Yes. Welcome to Pop Screen, listeners. We are the Geek Show's podcast covering the good, the bad, and the bizarre of movies either starring, about, or by pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a writer for Byline Times, We Are Cult, and, of course, the Geek Show itself. And I've been joined by...
You've been joined by Mark Cunliffe. I'm also a writer for The Geek Show, We Are Cults, and I have written for Arrow Film. The latest one is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which was out last November. And I've also got a chapter in Scarred for Life Volume 2.
We are back in Scarred for Life territory. We are in Britain in the 70s, albeit
yeah.
in a very different register for this week's show.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that's particularly scarred me from this film, although I do have incredibly fond memories of watching it as a child, usually over the Christmas period, and it was again on this Christmas as well. So it regularly pops up as the selection box of BBC schedules, I think.
Yes, it's Escape to Athena. I have to admit, when you pitched me the idea of covering a 70s film called Escape to Athena, I assumed it was going to be about people out shopping for a poster, but no. It's a Second World War film with an incredible cast, it must be said. Roger Moore, Telly Savalas, Stephanie Powers, Elliot Gould, David Niven, Richard Roundtree, Claudia Cardinale, Michael Sheard, and the reason we are here today, Sonny Bono.
Yay! Yeah, it's a Lew Grade production, which means it's hugely starry in cast. I've got a little quote here on my phone from Stephanie Powers.
Yeah.
It says, "The names had been needed to raise the money. Think about it. I was there to catch the TV audiences and younger men. Richard Roundtree to bring in the black moviegoers. Niv for the older generation. Rog because he's handsome and a very, very big star. Claudia was there to catch the older roving eye. Elliot because, as he said, he was under contract. Sonny already owned most of Las Vegas, but still desperately wanted to be an actor. And Telly, I love that bit. And Telly, well, nobody quite knew why he was there, except that the film was set in Greece." Which I think kind of sums up the weird sort of package holiday of stars. What are we all doing here in Rhodes?
Yeah, one for everyone there, I would think. I think she's missed a trick with Elliot Gould, mind. I think Elliot Gould is there because all of those all-star World War II films made in the 60s and 70s always introduced someone who was inescapably post-war, who could not have existed in the 1940s. You know, the classic example is, was it Donald Sutherland in The Dirty Dozen?
wasn't the Dirty Dozen, it was Kelly's Heroes. He is in the Dirty Dozen, but
Kelly's
it's
Heroes,
a
that's
small role.
it.
But
Yeah,
Kelly's Heroes, he's the full-on hippie, isn't he? The full-on Vietnam hippie.
that's it. Yeah.
And yeah, that's a good comparison, because there's a moment in Kelly's Heroes where they do the big walk down the street towards the Nazis, and there's a moment where
Mm.
Donald Sutherland sort of looks to Clint Eastwood and has a smirk on his face, and he's kind of sort of saying, "You've done this before in the Leone films." It's a really knowing wink of that. So the way the whole thing is set up and shot, and the music is very Leone, and it's that knowing wink. And I find that with Escape to Athena, it's one of the fun ways of watching it. After I've watched it, I mean, I've watched it several times now, from childhood to where I am now in my mid-40s, and one of the ways I like to amuse myself watching it now is imagine Elliot Gould is some sort of time traveller. because, because it just doesn't fit, does it? And some of his lines, I mean, there's the line in it where he says, 20 years from now, when the Germans are selling Volkswagens to the world, and it's just
Yes.
too glib, too pat. It's like you've been, you know something that others don't. Yeah,
Yeah, completely. You can watch this and have a sort of fun game of which of these stars' other films have they like walked in from,
yeah,
because Gould is playing the whole thing like he's still in a Robert Altman movie.
yeah, yeah. Well, I don't think he ever played anything else, really, did he?
Maybe not. Yeah, yeah.
And there's a
But that,
wonderful, weird little cameo from William Holden, isn't there? Did you spot that? Where he's smoking the cigar, and he's clearly the same character from Stalag 17. And Elliot Gould comes up to him and goes, "Are
yes.
you still here?" Again, it's just like, he knows, doesn't he? He knows he knows his war films, so it's kind of weird. It's like he's just been plucked from 1979.
Yeah, very, very odd, that moment. I think that the whole film, in a way, feels odd now, although not because of any shortcoming. It's just that I've long observed that that kind of all-star entertainment blockbuster war movie is one of those subgenres that just does not exist anymore, and it feels quite strange that it ever did. I mean, anyone can find a subgenre that seems strange nowadays just by looking for things that are obviously taboo. You know, anyone can say, "No, you couldn't get away with making an Italian cannibal movie these days." Well, yeah, no shit. Um, but when you look at something that is very mainstream, absolutely, as you say, Christmas dinner with the family watching, and that still feels like something that you would make it now, and people would say, "You sure this tasteful? You know, you sure
Yeah,
that
yeah.
is
It,
it right to have this much fun with Nazi characters?" I don't know.
that's so true. I mean, there are lines where the boundaries of taste really cross over in this film as well, which I'm sure we'll discuss
Mm,
later on. But for me, it's a measure of how far the war film had gone by this point, because it's sort of
mm,
the interesting thing about war films is they started cropping up immediately after the war. I mean, there was the
yeah,
propaganda films that were being made at the time, usually from Ealing and stuff like that. Um, and then after the war, a lot of them were sort of based on memoirs. I was Monty's double and stuff like that. They're all like,
yeah.
now this story can be told! Exclamation mark. Um,
Mm,
so then they become a kind of entertainment, but it's sort of an entertainment that the people who actually were involved in the conflict, or the children or whatever, could watch, and it becomes a weird kind of entertainment of a very real open wound almost.
yeah,
Um, then this changes a bit in the 60s, because you get films like Guns of Navarone, Where Eagles Dare, all the Alistair MacLean novels, that suddenly they are packaged as entertainment. And you can
yeah,
find you can draw a line from those films to the James Bond films. They're very, very similar.
yeah.
They play into the similar genre tropes. They have similar uh, ways that they deal with suspense and espionage and what have you. The spy films set in the war, basically, aren't they? The sort of
Yeah.
wartime Bond movies. And then you get to the 70s, and I don't think the films are bringing in as much as they used to, but there's still a weird audience for them. And they're trying to modernise it as they go. So you get films like Force 10 from Navarone, which has Edward Fox and Robert Shaw, but also Harrison Ford and Carl Weathers from the Rocky movie. And Harrison Ford had just come off the back of Star Wars. So they're obviously trying to have an eye on like the next generation. This is very, very similar because of that hodgepodge of casting. Because you've got, I mean, your biggest name there is Roger Moore. I mean, it's a huge cast, but your big name is Roger Moore, really, isn't it? And he is Bond at that time, so that's gold, really, isn't it? Everybody's going to watch that because it's got one of the biggest names in cinema. And it's weird to think that Roger Moore was once one of the biggest names in cinema, but he was, and he was brilliant and brilliant, a self-effacing man to be that. But to me, these are like, it's like a mark of like the war films have become almost like a star-studded panto rather than and that's why I think it fits brilliantly for Christmas, because it is that kind of it's that transition of like your parents have become your grandparents and the children, and every generation, because we're looking at 3 generations there, every generation are getting something out of this film or films like this.
And I think one of the things that shifted it culturally is the thing you mentioned a bit back, is Star Wars, because by the mid-70s, you've got an audience, a cinema audience that is generationally fractured. You have a young audience for whom war means Vietnam, for whom war means a very painful, divisive thing that we lost, at least in American terms. And part of what Star Wars did that is kind of underreported isn't just that it invented the modern blockbuster, it's that it basically took all of the fun bits of a war movie and put it in an environment where politics and real life suffering weren't important. So this is very much that kind of war movie on the way out. It's 79. Everyone's looking forward to the second Star Wars film. The mania that was caused, the craze by the airing of the Star Wars Holiday Special, the greatest piece of Star Wars media, is just a year old. And so it goes into this Baroque period, doesn't it, where everything, all of the familiar ingredients are there, but they're pushed a bit further. They've become a bit weird.
Yeah, that is very true. And I think you reach the critical point is Escape to Victory a couple of years later, where not only do they have, let's have a star-studded cast of like Michael Caine and Sylvester Stallone, but we'll throw a shitload of professional footballers in the mix as well.
Yes.
It's just bizarre now, really, isn't it? But and it's weird that is, I think because it's about football, it plays into our national psyche more than Escape to Athena probably does. But they're both very kind of similar sort of starry pantos.
Escape to Victory, it's always worth remembering that Escape to Victory is a film from the director of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. You think, what the fuck?
Bizarre. Absolutely bizarre, isn't it? It's the weirdest choice ever. I mean, there's an entire podcast dissecting that. There's a whole series of podcasts dissecting Escape to Victory, I think, isn't there? And how
there's got to be a pop star in it somewhere. I can't believe you can have a cast that random and not just throw, I don't know, Sheena Easton in there or something.
We'll have to look into that and see whether anybody did actually have a minor pop hit. Maybe one of the European actors involved might have had a small hit in like Papa Bendy from the Eurovision or something. But yeah, I completely agree. It is that point, and then I think Escape to Victory is the last sort of war movie of its kind, really. And we don't really do, like you said, we don't really do them. We don't do war movies to that way. I mean, I know Tarantino did Inglourious Bastards, which is quite starry, and it does have that weird sort of stunt casting of Mike
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 Myers.
Myers, yeah, and
Yeah.
I think originally Adam Sandler was going to be
He was, yeah,
as well,
in
yeah,
the Eli Roth role.
but
Yeah.
yeah, it just isn't done anymore. There was one a few years back. Well, I say a few years back, probably about 10 years back now, called The Last Drop, which was a straight-to-video
Okay.
thing. It was really cheap, and that had a weird cast of like Sean Pertwee, Rafe Spall, Lawrence Fox as a Nazi, of course. Little did we know at the time, but
Yes.
Billy Zane, and also David Ginola.
Right.
Yeah.
You think the thing that I thought could turn it around was when Christopher Nolan did Dunkirk. I thought, he is something. He is someone who is doing a summer release big blockbuster war movie that is, it did go on to be nominated for Oscars, and I'm sure they were hopeful that it would be nominated for Oscars, but that wasn't the point. It wasn't 1917. It wasn't a sort of auteur-driven film about the horrors of war. It's a big old take-your-family summer war movie.
Yeah.
And that did very well, but for some reason it sparked no imitators, as far as I can tell.
No, that's true, yeah. I mean, the only imitator it probably sparked was Darkest Hour, wasn't it? We sort of bogged down in this Brexit baiting wave your flag sort of movie making instead, rather than let's just do fun war films. Yeah. But this is sort of like, is it a war film or a caper film? Or an action comedy? It's a weird. You could throw this. There's a huge melting pot here, and not just the cast, isn't there? I mean, it's a huge melting pot of ideas, anyway.
And I think Grade said afterwards something like it would have been more successful if we toned down the comedy and focused on the action.
Yeah, as good as Elliot Gould is, and as fun as he is in it, if they'd toned it down a bit and just gave it a bit more oomph in terms of action. I've just realised Roger Moore has a huge bit in this film where he says oomph, and I've just said what is oomph, girl?
That's the most extraordinary thing, isn't it? That's one of the things that detoxifies it the most, is that Roger Moore plays a Nazi, and it's one of what Matt Kermode calls the Meg Ryan is a helicopter pilot moment, isn't it? Where as soon as you describe it, your immediate reaction is just, no, they're not. Yeah, that's not what happens.
Yes, and he's not like is he SS or is he Wehrmacht? I can't remember now in it, but
I can't remember either.
I think they make a point of saying is he Wehrmacht? Yeah, I think because Anthony Valentine is SS, isn't he? And Anthony Valentine is basically playing the same part he played in Colditz. So he's the SS, isn't he? Yeah, he's Wehrmacht, but they make a point of saying he's Wehrmacht and he's Austrian. So
that's the accent.
So the sympathy that we can't criticise Roger Moore's lack of Germanic accent when you've got Michael Caine in The Eagle Has Landed, who is basically reminiscent of Buster Merrifield in Only Fools and Horses, speaking German. When he just goes, "What is your name?"
Even with I guess this goes by what you'd now call, Chernobyl rules, Grand Budapest Hotel rules, where the actors just speak in their natural accents for the most part, and there you go, that's that, it's artifice, who cares?
Yeah.
But Muppet has this amazing bit early on where Elliot Gould has been like walking through the prison camp doing all of this. Well, a shtick. He calls it shtick. Yeah. He's like a fast-talking New York stand-up.
He's Fozzie Bear, isn't he?
He's
even got the hat. He's Fozzie Bear.
There is a moment where he's introduced to Roger Moore as Otto Hecht, this Wehrmacht captain with the non-more Germanic name. And I think we're meant to be very impressed that Hecht works out that this guy's Jewish when it's like, how could you miss it?
I mean,
You're not talking.
he was just shy of pulling down his trousers and showing his circumstance.
We are not talking about Christoph Waltz in Inglorious Bastards here. This isn't the great detective of the Nazis that we're dealing with.
It's so true, isn't it? But no, I mean, they are the lines of bad taste that I think are drawn in this film. There's a lot of reference to the fact that he's Jewish and that Stephanie Powers. I mean, we should explain that Gould and Powers are what they call the USO, US overseas overseas entertainers. So they're sort of like lower tier vaudeville acts to entertain the troops, aren't they?
Yeah.
But what we had, we called them Ensa, didn't they? But I think they were USO. And obviously their plane has been shot down, on between gigs, and they are now in this prisoner of war camp in the fictional Greek island of Athena. It's Rhodes.
It's Rhodes, yeah.
Unmistakably Rhodes. But yeah, so he's sort of like, he's a bit seedy, Roger Moore, isn't he? Let's face it. He wants Stephanie Powers. And it's sort of like his blackmail thing is basically like, play nice for me. Otherwise, Anthony Valentine in the SS will find out that Elliot Gould's Jewish and ... And it's kind of creepy, horrible, bad taste moments in a film that is otherwise very light and breezy. And the fact that between Moore and Powers develops a really genuine affection and he gets the girl at the end of the film, you kind of think, yeah, but he was pretty fucking creepy at the beginning. It's a real about face in this film that Roger Moore suddenly just becomes incredibly sympathetic.
Yeah, it's very weird.
Yeah.
And it's like the lines of seediness, you say seediness, I think that's a good word for it. There isn't really any sex and there isn't really any violence, but there's a kind of seediness to bits of it.
Yeah, I mean, the whole camp breakout is played along this really tacky striptease that Stephanie Powers in like Betty Grable cheesecake sort of fashion plays out, which sees... if you ever want to see Grange Hill's Mr. Bronson spunking his pants, then this is the film for you, really.
And who hasn't? That's of course Michael Sherd, who was an absolute Nazi specialist, wasn't he? In his career,
he's not playing Hitler here. He's playing a really clumsy sort of Hogan's Heroes style little fat sergeant, isn't he?
Very Himmler-esque glasses, I thought.
Yeah. We could lose again. There's an entire podcast series here to be had in like Michael Sheard plays German ... There's every, particularly this era, every sort of action war movie had Michael Sheard pop up as a German. In the same way that the era before that, it was Anton Diffrin playing some sort of like thin-lipped Nazi officer as well.
Yes, yeah. But it's one of those things, isn't it, where we expect the Nazis to be a bit seedy, and of course they are, because this is when you're dealing with Nazis in like mass market fiction, obviously you can't get into the Holocaust, you can't get into the real reasons why the Nazis were evil, so they just tend to get portrayed as being a bit pervy instead. and you kind of expect that. I mean, there is one minor Nazi in here he pronounces the word prostitute in exactly the manner of Withnail's Uncle Monty. Prostitute.
It's true. Yeah, it is. I mean, like I say, they allude to the nastiness. They allude to the real horrors of the Holocaust. But really, this is we're talking base level Nazi sort of behaviour, which is sort of, as you say, seedy, a bit pervy. The most horror we see is Anthony Valentine basically rounding up Greek villagers and shooting them for no discernible reason. And which I suppose sells it. It sells the reason that these are monsters, and Anthony Valentine is very good in this. But yeah, it's on the whole, Michael Sheard, Roger Moore, quite harmless figures, really, in it, aren't they?
Completely, yeah. And even if they weren't, the lines of that kind of seediness are blurred by the fact that the leader of the Greek resistance on this island is Zeno, the Telly Savalas character who runs a brothel with his girlfriend. And you think it's I don't want to say it doesn't make sense. Zeno is not a paradox, joke for all you Greek philosophy fans out there. I'm sure we've got some of them in the audience. But it's like...
They're all sat there now going, yes!
I've been waiting 88 episodes for one.
Finally!
But it's like... It's not bad, it's just the kind of weird double standard that you sort of expect in a movie this either, where it's like, the lads need a bit of recreation, a bit of slap and tickle, and it's, but the Germans are depraved.
I think on one of my Letterboxd reviews I joke, because I do like Telly Savalas in this, and Claudia Cardinale as his girlfriend, brothel keeper. I think he's very good. Telly Savalas could be hit and miss in a lot of films, but I think he's quite good in this because he plays the macho-ness, but it's not overbearingly macho. Completely. In the way that a lot of his roles would be, when he's stripped to the waist and sort of looking, it's a bit sleazy macho. But yeah, I joke in one of my Letterboxd reviews that I'd love to have seen a sequel to Escape to Athena, in which Savalas and Cardinale are shot dead by the Allies on orders of Churchill and Roosevelt for being communists. It would be a much darker film.
Escape to Athena, the sequel, Operation Gladio. Yes.
It'd be a much darker film, wouldn't it?
I'm glad you mentioned Cardinal, because she's an actress I always have a lot of time for, and of course she has this incredible career. Like any savvy Italian actor of her generation, she knew that there was a generation of directors coming up like Fellini and Visconti who could give her extraordinary parts, and she was in some of their best remembered film. But to me, Cardinal's real genius is that she is able to be the token woman in a macho adventure film without being boring. These are not interesting parts, but you look at Cardinale in Once Upon a Time in the West, you look at her in Fitzcarraldo, she's magnetic, she's really good, and I'm not sure those roles would work with anyone else.
That is very true. And I think there's, like you say, there is not a lot on paper here, but what she brings to it suggests that there is a lot going on, or that there has been a lot leading up to this moment for her. And whether that is because she brings baggage of other roles, other similar roles, helps to... Because again, it's a starry cast, most of them are playing to their key strengths. So, again, she's playing to her own key strengths. So that sort of sells that character in the way that... we know Roger Moore's going to turn good because he's James Bond. We know David Niven's going to be charming and urbane and a sort of dramatic centre in the film because it's David Niven. Even when everything gets silly all around you, you've got David Niven as your sort of through line of like somebody's taking it seriously, and there is something sort of there is a plot to follow here through his sort of reactions to what's going on around him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also helps that for all they're in a kind of insalubrious profession, I think it's quite sweet that the film depicts Savalas and Cardinale as having a pretty loving relationship, and they end the film dancing together. I sort of wanted to dub Gangnam Style over that dance. I think it's just got that vibe to it.
I think Telly just wanted. I mean, I know Stephanie Powers is saying nobody knew why Telly was there. He wanted to do that dance, basically, I think. And that dance is choreographed by none other than Arlene Phillips. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Strictly from Dancing's Arlene Phillips, yeah.
Yes, yeah. For listeners who are unaware, Arlene Phillips was one of the original 4 judges on Strictly Come Dancing. She also choreographed another film that I'm sure we'll do on pop screen at some point.
She was Hot Gossip as well.
Oh, yes, she was.
Music, yeah. Hot Gossip.
Can't Stop the Music.
Yeah. There is some nice sort of offset photos of her with Elliot Gould and Stephanie Powers, and a wonderful offset photo, which I presume was I can't wonder why it was taken, actually, to be honest, because it's Roger Moore in full Nazi uniform doing the Nazi salute on Greek ruins, and behind him somebody has written "Fuck Hitler" on the wall, and every shot that he's in covers up either the F or the U. And it's wonderful. I mean, it's wonderfully done, but I can't imagine that selling the film, because there's no denying that is fuck.
Yeah.
At what point do you sell a film based on like that kind of word in like newspapers at the time? I can't see what. Well, unless it was just a laugh.
It maybe was, but do you think that's maybe also part of the sort of thinking behind casting Gould, that they are saying to this new kind of countercultural audience, it's okay, it's not quite your dad's war movie, there's a bit of swearing, there's one of those sort of long-haired wiseacres that you guys like these days in it, bit of sexy stuff,
Yeah, and it's strange because like, if this was made 5 years earlier or 6 years earlier, it would chime really well. But because it's 1979, that kind of thing's lost, isn't it? And it's on the way out already. That kind of, and like I say, he could have been Gould could come out like Donald Sutherland, but in Kelly's Heroes, but he's more like Fozzie Bear, and that is the difference, isn't it? It's not countercultural; it's suddenly like cheesy vaudeville mainstream kind of thing, which is weird.
It's too late, and I think Lew Grade is just trying to market towards an audience he didn't really understand there. He's
an interesting character, Lew Grade, isn't he? Because he understood 60s television brilliantly, to the point that it was just cookie cutter television, wasn't it? Every series was more or less the same, with more or less the same actors in it every week. It was just a rep company of like, I'm doing The Saint this week, I'm doing Randall and Hopkirk Deceased next week, I'm doing The Baron the week after that, Man in the Suitcase the week after that, and ad infinitum. But when it came to cinema, he just didn't get it, did he? Everything was always just a bit wrong, and
I think it's that classic case of someone assuming that they can port the genius that they had in one medium over to another, which in practice very rarely works. I mean, I've done nearly 90 episodes of a series about pop stars trying to do exactly that, and let me tell you, if anyone is qualified to say it very rarely works, it is me.
True, that is true. That is very true, yeah. But yeah, I mean, he had some weird sort of titles, and they're not. I think it's because it's our generation who grew up with them, watching them on television on like a bank holiday or a Christmas or something like that they have a residual affection for. But these are not great films by any stretch of the imagination. They're fun films, but they're not great films. I mean, there's Raise the Titanic, the Cassandra.
That's the classic example, isn't it? Raise the Titanic. It was such a bomb.
Yeah, I mean, and it's weird to think that it's based on a Clive Cussler novel, and it's a series of Clive Cussler novels that apparently do very, very well. I think later on there was one called, is it Sahara with Matthew McConaughey? It's the
Yes.
same character, but they're just light years away from each other, aren't they? It's like you could
Yeah.
picture that being in the franchise of films. It's just a completely different tone, style, era, setting.
And Cussler was furious about that. There were lawsuits flying all over the place
Right,
about Sahara that,
right,
he thought they'd ignored all of his guiding counsel about how this character should be portrayed.
right. I don't know. I mean, I don't. I'm not even sure if I've watched it. It just come off as a very sort of Romance in the Stone rip-off, really, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, Lew Grade did some weird films in the 70s, and like I say, there's a residual affection for them, but they're not great movies by any stretch of the imagination.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you talk about it generationally, I think there is a generation that we belong to with that kind of older millennial Gen X crossover who were always shocked when they hear that Raise the Titanic was a massive flop because we remember it being on telly all the time. So
Yeah.
it must be pretty successful. Otherwise, why is it on telly
Yeah.
all the
And I
time?
could never compute like the cast list that he'd assemble for these films. So why was it crap? Why did it flop?
Yeah.
It's like the Cassandra Crossing's got like Richard Harris, Sophia Loren, O.J. Simpson before, obviously, you know what. And the same as this film as well. I mean, even Farewell My Lovely with Robert Mitchum, on paper that should work fantastically, but it just doesn't really.
It's got a perfect bit of casting, but it's like it feels like a sketch, doesn't it? Farewell, my lovely. It feels like it should be introduced by someone going, "What would Robert Mitchum be like in Farewell, my lovely?" I think it would go a little like this.
It's true. It's true. And although, like with a lot of noir films, the voiceover is always going to be an issue in a post Frank Drebin world.
Yes.
Because it just always puts in mind Police Squad. But unlike a lot of noir films, Farewell My Lovely really doesn't escape that. When Mitchum says that line about she had a look that registered in my hip pocket, it's just Frank Drebin. It's not Chandler. It's just Frank Drebin, and there's no escaping it. But yeah, that's another example of Lew Grade being too late in terms of
Yeah.
casting. Mitchum would have been a perfect Philip Marlowe 20 years earlier, but
Yeah, completely.
1975, he's too old.
Yeah.
And now they're making the same mistake, casting Liam Neeson as Marlowe in a film set in 1939.
Oh, yeah. That's not Neil Jordan?
It's Neil Jordan, yeah.
It's Neil Jordan. Yeah.
Previously discussed on this very podcast. Yeah, Neil Jordan. Yeah.
Yeah. When he did the Butcher Boy. Yeah.
I mean, cast Liam Neeson by all means, but try and do like a Poodle Springs thing to it and have him in like the late 50s or the early 60s, but cast him in 1939 just doesn't make any sense.
I think with Chandler in general, you've got that problem that that again, going back to Robert Altman, he described when he was making Gosford Park, where he said, I wanted to do a country house murder mystery. I thought that would be fun to do. So me and Bob Balaban got together and we read all of the Agatha Christie novels and all of the short stories and plays, and we concluded that there was not a single thing in these that had not been mined out by film and television. And currently Kenneth Branagh is busy proving that is the case.
Yeah.
So it's like I love Chandler. I think Chandler is a genius, but I think the only way you can go with those novels is to do something inspired by them rather than actually adapt them.
Yeah.
I think the adaptations that were produced at the time he was active are so iconic that you can't, even if you're Robert Mitchum, who you would think would be able to break this issue, even Robert Mitchum comes off as someone play acting.
Yeah. That's true. And of course, the elephant in the room here is that, you've just mentioned Altman, and Elliot Gould is one of the subjects of this podcast, and they are the perfect marriage for probably the best sort of outside of The Big Sleep or Murder My Sweet, as it was retitled with Dick Powell. The best one is The Long Goodbye, absolutely.
Because it makes absolutely no effort to replicate the mood of the 40s adaptations.
Yeah, that's and it's just in a way that, like, previously they did a modern day one with James Garner called Marlowe that just didn't work either. So yeah, I mean, it just hit gold. That really just hit Gould.
Yes.
We've sort of distracted away from the point, really, haven't we, already?
We've wandered off, but I will say this. We're talking about films that are too late, and
Yeah.
I think looking back, it is very obvious that, you could have made an unironic flag-waving war movie that didn't have all this comedy business in 79, because it's the dawn of the Reagan era. People are ready for that played straight with no sops to the counterculture anymore. People are ready for it. And one of the people who cleaned up with exactly that kind of movie is George P Cosmatos, the director who went on to direct Rambo First Blood Part 2.
Yeah, that's true. He had an interesting career, didn't he?
He's taken very seriously now, Cosmatos. He's one of those 80s action directors who, I guess maybe because he was never like as consistently successful as a James Cameron or a John McTiernan, and people think there's something to discover there. There's something that they have to champion, and people like that. People do, I've found, feel that way towards George P. Cosmatos.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking specifically at is the genre that we're discussing here, which is the war movie, you've got it's a very interesting through line from like the 70s to the 80s, because you've got Massacre in Rome, which is a very dour procedural story of basically a Nazi genocide of Italian people because of a partisan attack on an SS squad. So basically just round up as many Italians as we can and murder them in a mine in Rome. So that's a very dour procedural, quite dull film, really. And then you've got this, which is anything but that. And then you've got the jingoistic, flag-waving Rambo films that followed. It's a strange, it's a very strange career. Of the three, I'm always going to stick with this one. Because it's fun, and also I think it's probably one of his better directed movies. Actually, I don't think it gets enough credit as a nicely shot movie. I think there's some stunning cinematography from is it Gil Taylor? Beautiful aerial shots at the beginning.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, that opening, part of the sort of wonder's been took out of it, maybe for newer audiences, because nowadays you just assume it was a drone.
Yeah.
He's presumably up there in a helicopter directing an action scene on the ground. It is incredible. It's a fantastic piece of direction.
It's beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. And also, what is rightly regarded as one of the best motorcycle chases ever committed to celluloid. I think one person rated it third after The Great Escape, and another one which is
Skyfall.
Skyfall, that's right. Yeah. So I mean, we're not talking small potatoes here. It is a genuinely good motorcycle chase.
Absolutely.
If anybody if anybody's into the motorbike stunts and they've never seen this film, put down your bacon butty and put this on immediately, because it is a brilliantly shot sequence. The only problem I have with it is it's Elliot Gould doing it, and I don't understand the logic of this. Why does Telly Savalas, a hard-bitten partisan, stage a hit on Anthony Valentine and his death squad of Nazi officers, and then suddenly shouts to the guy who is cowardly Bob Hope comedian to get on a bike chase after Anthony Valentine, the prize of this whole, hit, and murder him. Wouldn't you do that yourself? Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you sort of trust yourself to do that rather than a bloke you've just had to teach how to use a gun? I mean, what logic dictates that? I mean, that is one of those where I wonder if they went, no, well, you've got to give Elliot Gould this bit. This is the big bit. He's like, the big property here. His name comes in at the end of the credits with, and Elliot Gould as Charlie. You've got to, with a nice little writing of Charlie, not just signature style writing on the credits. You've got to give him the big moment, but it doesn't make a lick of sense as to why you would trust a bloke who is a comedian.
It does, in a weird way, it does make the scene more suspenseful.
It does,
yeah. The way through, you're thinking, I don't believe this guy can ride a fucking bike, let alone one of these.
And again, I've mentioned Fools and Horses twice now in this podcast, but you know that bit where, I think it's in the Heroes and Villains episode, where Rodney chases after the mugger, and then he corners him, and then the mugger looks at him thinking, I can take you. And then next thing you see Rodney running away. It's one of those, you wonder if that's how it's going to end.
Well, there's lots of things in it which do not pay off in the way you expect. I mean, all the way through I was thinking there's got to be a twist where Roger Moore turns out to be a British double agent, right?
Would make more sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And the biggest twist of all, and although he's the main reason we're talking about this, we've not mentioned it yet, the biggest twist of all, Sonny Bono doesn't sing in it.
Yes, it's quite a weird role for him to take because there's not much to it, I think.
Also, he's a fucking racing car driver. Get him to chase after Anthony Valentine.
Yes.
Doesn't make any sense. He's supposed to be an Italian prisoner of war who's a racing driver, a cook, and sometimes I sing, he says, but never gets to sing.
That is weird, isn't it? Because that line of dialogue surely only exists to explain why he'll be singing later on in the movie. Except, as he said, he doesn't.
He gets that moment at the camp show that is sort of like... and if you want to know the difference between this and a film like Massacre in Rome, it's the fact that the camp breakout involves, Stephanie Powers shaking her tatars at Michael Sheard to the point that he's fit to bust. Meanwhile, everybody else is fit to bust because the David Niven and all them lot have fed them laxatives. That, I mean, it's like Beano has written a war film at this point, isn't it?
But Sonny Bono in it is not just Italian, he's like very Italian.
Is he? Mamma.
Every single scene you're like scrutinising the sort of where's the pasta and meatballs? That seems to be the one bit that isn't here.
He's basically the influence on those ragu puppets in the 90s.
I'll tell you why I had an unexpected thought about Sonny Bono. It's that I don't think he's very good in this. I will. No.
He's nice. He's cute.
Yeah.
But he's not very good. And like you say, he gets his big moment to sing at that camp show, and he's just miming to a record that Elliot Gould is playing on a gramophone, a wind-up gramophone.
But I'll tell you what I thought he would be really good at when I watched this. Maybe this is one of the things that he could have done if he wasn't a Republican, but I don't know. But he has that big droopy Zapata mustache, and I thought you would be a great stoner comedian. Put this guy in a Cheech and Chong movie, and he just fits in perfectly.
Yeah, that's so true. That is so true. Incidentally, his Wikipedia page has a bit about his acting roles. This film isn't mentioned.
Wow. So we've gone for the obscure one of the Sonny Bono.
And I sat reading that Wikipedia page and thinking, I don't know any of it. I've heard Troll I've heard of, never watched it.
Yes.
But the rest I'm like, no idea, sorry, don't know. And you don't mention this one that's on every Christmas.
Weird that. There is one way, and I think this could be a nice closing thought, but there is one way in which Sonny Bono had perhaps more influence over modern Hollywood than anyone else I can think of.
Did he tell Cher she could act?
I mean, probably
He
yes,
probably did.
but
Yeah.
but Sonny Bono's signature piece of legislation when he
Oh
was
yeah.
what was he, a senator or a congressman, or he's a
Something like that.
representative?
Yeah.
He was in the House of Representatives. His signature piece of legislation was the Copyright Extension Act, which meant that all of those pre-war characters like Mickey Mouse and Batman, who would otherwise be well out of copyright by now, could still be under a studio's contract. And it's impossible to think about what movies now would be like if that legislation hadn't passed, I think.
True. Yeah. You could have an entirely different person making Mickey Mouse movies.
Yeah.
It's weird, isn't it? Yeah. I think it passed after his death, didn't it? I think he was campaigning for it for a long time, and then I think his widow helped sort of like push it over the line after his death. Died in a very tragic skiing accident, didn't he?
Yes, yeah, I remember that. That must have been, when was that?
1998.
I was going to say, I thought I remembered it happening, and yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he's a likable. I mean, for a Republican, he's a likable. He's a likable person, isn't he? There's a screen presence that's really likable. I learned yesterday, looking at his Wikipedia, that he co-wrote Needles and Pins, which I didn't know. Yeah, so
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. So it's because I mean he was very good writing with when he was Sonny and Cher, wasn't it? Some beautiful songs there. But no, I didn't know if his career sort of outside of that or beyond before it. Not at all. Yeah. Speaking of music, we have to mention Lalo Schifrin has a brilliant score in this film as well.
Yes,
it's
and
that really good Greek-infused evocative score, isn't it?
It's gorgeous. It's one of those things where most of this movie gives you sort of mixed feelings about this era of war movies and how well they worked, but there are some things in it that really make you think, oh man, I do wish they still made them like that. And Lalo Schifrin is one of them. I don't think any other era would hire Lalo Schifrin to soundtrack a war movie. You know, he's too smooth, he's too easy, but it works gorgeously.
It's, I mean, that sort of jangly sort of Greek sort of ding 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 ding. You know, so it goes very Zorba the Greek, doesn't it?
Gangnam Style, yes, that's it.
But also that constant refrain of when the Saints go marching in as well, which is really clever. And as a St. that's always a big score for us because that's our anthem for the rugby league club.
Oh, right.
So that whenever you hear that, it's automatically it's a bit of civic pride, really. Maybe that's why I like this film. I don't know.
They always had that, didn't they? The war movies from like the immediate post-war era. They generally built their scores around some old folk song or marching.
Yeah, you've got like Colonel Bogey for Bridge on the River Kwai and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah. I've also got to mention the title of this film as well, Escape to Athena, because it sounds vaguely generically war movie, but then you realise that it's the wrong word, isn't it? It should be Escape from Athena, not to Athena.
Yeah, I kept calling it Escape from Athena when I was researching this, and I just could not stop myself. Yeah.
It's so strange, isn't it? And then you realise that it's a travelogue, so of course you're going to call it Escape to Athena because it just feels like a summer brochure, doesn't it?
Yes, Escape to the Sun.
And then there's that wonderful coda at the end, isn't there? It's set in the present day, where they're sort of like showing you like the relics that were unearthed in the archaeological dig and the gold that they got back from the Nazis, and it's just like modern day tourists just sort of like standing on a spot where previously you've just seen Telly Savalas and Elliot Gould. And that again, music, Heatwave have that song at the end called a very disco song, isn't it? Keep Tomorrow for Me, I think it was called. It's a very soul disco type thing.
It works well though, doesn't it?
It's Boogie Nights, isn't it? It's basically Heatwave doing Boogie Nights again. Yeah.
And you've spent so long in this sort of very particular kind of world, which is sort of World War II, but also kind of 60s in its styling because it's harking back to those big entertaining war movies like The Great Escape. And then suddenly, right at the end, you've got the one thing in it that is unmistakably 70s, and it feels like a good thing to usher you out with.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, it's nice, and when I watch it now, it does remind me of sort of like being a kid in like roughly that time. Only a couple of years later, our first sort of like foreign holiday, and
Yeah.
it just looks like that. It just reminds me of that, and it's quite sweet, really. Yeah, it's
It's quite weird. The last film I watched that reminded me of sort of taking foreign holidays was After Sun, and it's quite weird that the one set in the German World War II prisoner of war camp is like the least harrowing one of those two.
and also, what does it say about my holiday experiences as a child? That so when you've done Butlins and Pontins, a film set in a sunny World War II holiday camp where David Niven's an archaeologist and Sonny Bono might be a racing car driver and Richard Roundtree's a circus stuntman. What the fuck?
That is, yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, what?
I know. Was he? And he's clearly American. So what was he doing there? It doesn't make any sense.
The unflappable Richard Roundtree,
He just
the
gets
man
to-
who was Shaft.
He just gets to smoke that big fuck off cigar in that in the bit where he gets discovered, isn't he, with the white towel over his head in the steam baths, which is a pretty fucking cool entrance, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that feels like a bit that was in his contract.
Yeah. Can I do my Shaft bit now? Yeah.
Yeah.
If James Bond is going to help Kojak win the affections of the girl from Uncle, then you've got to have Shaft have his moments as well.
Completely. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this week. Is there anything else that you'd like to sneak in before we?
No. All I will say is fair play to the stuntmen as well, who just constantly fall from rooftops and bell towers in the swan dives. Everybody just seems to exist to get shot from a great height.
Yes.
And then fall and do that sort of Edvard Munch scream as they go down as well.
Yeah. Yeah, including the great Vic Armstrong. He was on this.
Didn't he? Speaking of the motorbike chase, I think he choreographed that, didn't he, as well? Which is perfect.
I think that's a lesson more modern directors could stand to learn, that you don't have to direct everything yourself. So I rewatched Gentlemen Prefer Blondes over Christmas, and I came away convinced that it is the great American movie musical. But Howard Hawks was like, I don't know how to do dance numbers.
Yeah.
I didn't direct any of that stuff. I left it to the choreographer to do that. And you think, yeah, beautiful, collaborate. If you've got an expert on set, listen to the expert.
Absolutely. I watched Pennies from Heaven over Christmas and came away thinking that is not the great Hollywood musical. It's not even the great Hollywood revisionist musical. It's just shit.
I've never seen the film version of Pennies from Heaven. I've seen the Chris Walken routine, which I get the impression that is the bit you have to see.
Best bit in it, yeah. The rest is, I mean, everything that Dennis Potter got right with, I should say, the late, great Piers Haggard, who sadly died last week. Everything he got right at the time of filming, obviously. Everything he got right adapting Dennis Potter's work for the BBC series. Can't even remember the name of the guy who directed Pennies from Heaven. Is it Herbert Ross? Everything Haggard got right, he gets wrong.
Bob Hoskins said, he watched it and he thought that the problem is once you give it a Hollywood budget, you just think, oh yeah, spend all your time in fantasy. It looks great. It's an MGM musical.
Yeah.
Why bother living a real life?
That's absolutely it. I mean, there's a bit where even when they're trying to do like the reality, it starts off sort of like Poverty Row, Great Depression, but then there's a bit where they just put Steve Martin in Hopper's Nighthawks because
Yeah.
why not? And it's like, well, you've just pissed on your own chips, really, haven't you?
Yeah.
Very strange.
Well,
this is more fun. Watch Escape to Athena. It's more fun.
Absolutely.
Is it a better film? Yeah, probably. Yeah, actually. Yeah. I say no, it's not, but yeah, probably is actually.
But yes, listeners, there should be a Patreon exclusive coming out the day after this airs. What's it going to be? I've got no idea. I'm under-prepared for February.
I'm going for a big reveal. What's it going to be? It's going to be. It's going to be Escape to Victory when we find out that third footballer on the left had the 1968 Eurovision Song Contest entry for Bratislava.
Yeah, null pois to me there, I think. But of course, there will be another episode of Pop Screen out in a fortnight's time. We're hoping, at the time of recording, it will be Dance Craze, the Scar concert movie with Madness and
brilliant.
Beat and, of course, the late great Terry Hall with the specials. But until then, that's been your lot from Pop Screen. I've been Graham.
And I've been a sympathetic Nazi officer.
And we'll see you next week.